1 is now in session. The Honorable Mark E. Wyndham, Judge, presiding. Please be seated, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty close to 9:30. Don't like keeping you waiting even 10 minutes, but we're working on it. Technology is a wonderful thing. Someday we'll get it to work perfectly in this courtroom, but not quite yet. So we have bugs every morning, it seems. In any event, welcome back to Department 1, People versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnov today. And for the people, Mr. Balian and Mr. Milios, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, assisted by their investigating officer. Our witness, Dr. Fajardo, has resumed the witness stand. And Mr. Balian, you may resume your examination of the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Dillon will be here if he had an emergency with his hearing aid.
Thank you, Mr. Balian. You may proceed.
Good morning, Dr. Fajardo.
Good morning.
When we broke yesterday, we were about to discuss the wound on the back of decedent Susan Berman's head. Can you, I think you already described the location of the wound on the back of the head. I just want to make sure I understood it correctly. It was directly in the center back of the head, about 3.5 inches below the top of the head.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to show you what's previously been marked as People's 37D. Okay. Does this photograph fairly and accurately depict this wound that we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you testified this was an entrance wound and not an exit wound.
Correct.
And let me ask you, have you heard of the term sooting and stippling?
Absolutely.
What is that?
So sooting and stippling is when the gunpowder is burning from the muzzle of the weapon itself and it becomes deposited on the skin. It can leave telltale marks. Sooting is just like on a barbecue pit or your fireplace, that black material, kind of greasy, gritty material, that's soot. Stippling is actually burning and unburnt gunpowder pellets that impact the skin and give a very small abrasions around the injury. And again, these are indicative of range of fire, specifically pretty close range of fire.
Okay. And was there any evidence that you saw of any sooting or stippling on this wound?
No, not at all.
When you have a contact wound or near contact wound, do you always have sooting and stippling?
Not always.
What are some circumstances that would prevent the deposit of soot or stippling on the wound if it was a contact or a close contact wound?
So as you can imagine, if there's something intervening, usually garments, materials of some type, a hoodie, for example, very thick hoodie, can prevent soot and stippling from impacting the skin. Also, any other intervening garments that might be present, perhaps a towel or a pillow, might prevent soot or stippling from escaping the weapon and impacting the skin. Also, our decedent has very thick black hair. Sometimes that will also prevent the soot and stippling from impacting the skin. So all these factors together or individually may explain why she has none.
Okay. In the photograph, People's 37D.
Wait a minute. What about the distance of the weapon? Doesn't that affect the soot or stippling, the distance of the weapon from
Absolutely.
the wound?
Yes.
How close does it have to be for you to expect soot or stippling?
So it depends on the weapon itself, and what do I mean by that? So a small caliber projectile doesn't expel the soot and stippling very far. A small .22 caliber, little tiny thing, you have to be pretty darn close to get the stippling. A larger caliber weapon can be further apart. So the rule of thumb that we use is about 2 feet. You have to be about 2 feet close to get the sooting and the stippling.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you a little more detail about that in a second. In the photograph, it appears the head has been shaved. This is an obvious question, but I just want to make sure for the record it's clear. That was done by the individual who did the autopsy, the shaving of the scalp.
Correct.
Okay. Was a bullet or bullet fragments recovered from this person's brain?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe the path of the bullet that was taken through the skull?
So the path refers to what did the bullet hit. Obviously, the skull is immediately underneath the skin. The bullet went through there. And then the brain itself. The bullet itself travels primarily from the back of the head towards the front, almost straight on, right down the middle of the brain itself, and ends up, as you can imagine, injuring the brain as it traveled through there.
I have well, before I show you the photograph. Other than, when someone is shot in the back of the head like this, other than the obvious entrance wound, and other than the injury to the brain itself from the path of the bullet, do you typically see any other injuries to the front of the face when someone is shot in the back of the head?
It's possible, yes.
Can you describe what you mean by that?
So this decedent has what appears to be a black eye. Her right eye has hemorrhage into the surrounding soft tissues. It's not from impact. It's actually from the gunshot wound itself. As the bullet passes through the brain, there's a shock wave associated with that. And the orbital plates, as we call them, very, very thin, paper-thin bones that cover the roof of the eye orbit itself. And those are commonly fractured in gunshot wounds, not just contact wounds, but gunshot wounds in general. And you can get the appearance of a black eye, but it's not from impact, it's from the gunshot wound.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as People's 37E. Okay. Is this also a fair and accurate depiction of Susan Berman at the time of autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. And do you see her right eye? It appears to be a bruise over the right eye.
Correct.
Okay. Is this the bruise you're talking about?
Again, not a bruise. It's a collection of blood, which people will assume is a bruise. It looks like a bruise, but it's a hemorrhage associated with the gunshot wound. That's correct.
So when someone is shot in the back of the head, that bullet has momentum and velocity, right?
Correct.
And are you saying that when that bullet impacts the back of the head and then proceeds through the head at that velocity and with that momentum, does it create a shock wave forward within the brain from the back of the head towards the front of the head?
Not necessarily forward, but just it disperses the energy throughout the brain itself, causing that shock wave to fracture the orbital plates.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be from the back of the head. We will see these not infrequently in people who shoot themselves from suicides to the side of the head.
Okay. So the shooting, the impact of the bullet, causes a shock wave within the head. Is that right?
Correct.
And this shock wave fractures the orbital bones?
Correct.
And when the orbital bones are fractured, does that allow the blood to then seep forward into the eye area?
Correct.
And then that's what causes what appears to be a bruise but is really bleeding inside?
Correct.
Okay. So looking at People's 37E, is it your opinion that this bruise was caused by the gunshot wound to the back of the head and not by being struck in the face?
Correct. That is my opinion, that this is a result of the gunshot wound. Again, we see this fairly frequently.
Okay. And do you have any doubts in that opinion?
I do not.
Okay. Did you notice, upon your examination of the case, any other injuries to her body?
Again, she has that contusion. She has a bruise. She actually has a bruise to the back of her right hand, measured about ½ an inch.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as People's 37F.
Yes. Meanwhile, I think I'll mention for the record, which I had neglected to mention, that Mr. Durst is utilizing the services of our CART reporter for the hearing impaired. Counsel, would you stipulate that I need not mention that on the record on each occasion?
Sure.
Thank you. We'll note if for some reason the CART reporter were not present, And people stipulate as well that I need not mention at each instance on each day.
Yes, of course.
The presence of the court reporter, it's a given.
Yes.
The reporter will be here.
Yes. All right, so People's 37F, does this mark on this hand fairly inaccurately depict this injury you were discussing?
Yes.
Okay. And I want you to assume, well, describe what type of injury this is.
Right in the back, middle of the back of her hand, you can see that purplish discoloration. It's a bruise.
Okay.
That's about it.
I want you to assume that somebody was standing up when they were shot, and then they fell to the ground, or even if they were kneeling when they were shot and fell to the ground, and in the process struck their hand on the ground, falling. Would this injury to this hand be consistent with the type of injury you would expect to see based on that scenario?
Yes.
Did you, after reviewing this case file, form your own independent opinions as to the cause of death of this decedent?
Yes, I did.
What is your opinion?
Gunshot wound to head.
Any doubt about that?
Not at all.
Can you describe for the jury the mechanism of death in this particular case?
As you can imagine, when a bullet passes through the brain and it causes the damage that a gunshot wound will, it usually results in death, and that's what happened here.
Do you have an opinion as to the manner of death?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
Homicide.
What's the basis of that opinion?
So again, it would be extremely difficult to have a perfect, back to front gunshot wound caused by any other manner.
This gunshot wound to the back of the head, could you tell, based on analysis of the wound and the path of the bullet, what angle this bullet entered the back of the head, assuming the head was straight forward when the bullet entered?
Yes.
What is the path?
Again, it's perpendicular. It's traveling, again, pretty much straight on from the back of the head towards the front of the head.
How quickly would this victim have been rendered unconscious once they were shot in the back of the head?
Immediately.
And what would have happened at that point?
Well, you lose all sense of purposeful movement. You would fall down to the ground if you were standing up or kneeling. Any conscious efforts, any consciousness would be gone. And then death would ensue shortly thereafter.
Now, you said you lose all purposeful movement. Is there some not purposeful movement or involuntary movements that could occur?
Absolutely. With head injuries, specifically gunshot wounds of the head, it is not uncommon to have seizure-like activity after the injury itself. So there may be twitching and, again, unpurposeful movement of the decedent prior to their heart actually stopping.
Okay. Could their arms move positions?
Possibly.
Could their legs move positions?
Absolutely.
Is it possible they could, if they are on their stomach, flip to their back, on their back, flip to their stomach?
It is within the realm of possibility, but highly unlikely. Why? Because it takes somewhat purposeful movement to actually flip your body over. Is it possible? Sure. It is unlikely.
So, based on what you said earlier, is it your opinion that the barrel of this gun was directly behind and parallel to the victim's head when the victim was shot?
Correct.
And the path of the bullet was parallel to the ground?
Not necessarily, but if
Assuming the person was standing looking forward?
Correct, yes.
Assuming the victim was standing and looking forward when they were shot, would the shot have come from directly behind them?
Yes.
In your experience, when someone is standing and shot from behind, what, if anything, can you say about which direction they will fall?
They can fall in any direction. Again, as you can imagine, the shock wave causes muscle spasms, if you will. You can fall backwards, forwards, to the sides. You can crumple straight down. Many different scenarios are possible.
Okay, so someone might think that common sense would tell them that when they're shot with a bullet, the bullet has such momentum that if you're shot in the back of the head, you'll fall forward because of the momentum of the bullet. Is that not the case?
No, that is not the case. So in Hollywood, we portray all these gunshot wounds impacting the body, and the decedents fly here, there, and everywhere. That is completely false. So the bullet does not have enough mass to actually move a human body in a particular fashion. Probably the most famous gunshot wound I can think of is the John F. Kennedy shot. He gets shot in the back of the head, and you would think, well, that's a big rifle wound. It's going to push his head forward. Actually, it snapped it back. The reason being is that a lot of the skull and brain material actually ejected from the front, and that's why his head moved backwards. Very counterintuitive. What I'm trying to enforce is that that's just Hollywood.
Okay. So I take it then you can't render any opinions one way or the other as to the positioning of the victim's body in terms of what that means, in terms of how they were standing or which direction they were facing when they were shot.
That is correct.
And that's just not something a forensic pathologist would be able to do. Is that correct?
Not based on the autopsy itself. From a crime scene reconstruction perspective, perhaps, but that's not my area of expertise.
Got it. Can a forensic pathologist such as yourself determine the range of fire?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Again, we've discussed that previously. How close was that weapon when it was fired and impacted the human body?
What do you look for in determining that?
Again, what we just discussed. Is there soot? Is there stippling? Is there gas effect? Like in this case, there's actually splitting of the skin and the skull because of the gas of the weapon itself dissecting along the scalp.
So I'd like to talk about that a little more detail.
Sure.
What is gas effect? I don't think you fully described that.
So gas effect is, again, as the propellant, the gunpowder is burning, the way it moves that bullet down the barrel is by gas. That gas expands. It's a lot of gas traveling at a very high velocity. As it exits the barrel, as you can imagine, if it's against the skin, that gas has to go somewhere. And as it follows the hole that the bullet makes, it splits the skin in the characteristics that we see here. That is gas effect, that is skin splitting, commonly seen with contact gunshot wounds and near contact gunshot wounds.
Okay. So when a gun discharges a bullet, you're saying it's the explosion within the shell case that creates a gas, expanding gas. Is that right?
Correct.
And that gas pushes the bullet out the front of the gun.
Correct.
What comes out of the gun barrel first, the bullet or the gas?
The bullet.
Okay, and then right after the bullet follows the gas and various other particles that go along with the gas.
Exactly.
Okay, so the bullet enters the head first, if someone is shot in the back of the head?
Correct.
And then immediately thereafter, the gas would, if the gun was close enough, enter that same hole.
Correct.
Okay, and then that gas, if the weapon is close enough, when it enters that hole, would spread out and tear the skin in that pattern.
Exactly.
And what is it something about the pattern that's significant to you?
In the respect that it's stellate, it's star-shaped, like counsel said, it tears the skin, it lacerates the skin as it dissects between the skull and the skin itself, the pattern that we see here.
Does a bullet ever lacerate the skin like that?
It's rare to have a bullet give you a stellate pattern like this, and again, kind of my area of expertise is high-powered gunshot wounds. A AK-47 or an M16, a .223 round, if you will, can result in exaggerated entrance wounds, but then it would not have stopped inside the skull. It would have taken off the majority of the, again, like the John F. Kennedy case.
Okay. I'm going to show you again what's been marked as 37D. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Do you see the effects of the gas effect in this photo?
Yes, I do.
Can you point out for the jury exactly what you're looking at that tells you that there was gas effect in this case?
Again, without a laser, but you can see the star-shaped pattern. It's lacerations that emanate radially from the entrance wound itself. That's what we call gas effect.
Okay. And you're referring to the star pattern of the wound right there?
Correct.
Okay. So, to get this gas effect, in your background training and experience, how close does the muzzle of the gun have to be to the back of that head to cause that star pattern?
Again, it depends on the weapon that's used, but the most common weapons that are used,
Can I stop you? Can you assume it's a 9mm?
assuming it's a 9mm, then we're talking about within an inch, probably closer, probably half inch to contact itself.
All right. So are you telling this jury that whatever weapon, assuming it was a 9mm, caused that wound that you're looking at in this exhibit, when it was fired, the muzzle of that gun was either pressed up against the back of the head or within an inch?
That is correct.
Do you have any doubt whatsoever about that?
No, I do not.
What about the fact that there's no soot or stippling in that wound? Does that affect your opinion?
Not at all.
Have you ever seen this type of star pattern, like you see in this case, in any other wound other than a high-powered rifle where it was not a close contact wound?
I have not.
And do you have any doubt that if she was shot with a high-powered rifle, the front of her face would have been blown off?
I have no doubt.
And the explanation for the lack of sooting, you're saying, could be that she had thick black hair that prevented it?
That's correct.
Have you seen that frequently in your background training experience?
Not frequently, but I've seen it enough, absolutely.
Okay. Or it could have been that whoever shot this person covered the gun with a pillow or a blanket or a towel or something.
That is a possibility, absolutely.
Why do people typically do that in your experience?
Again, they think that it's going to muffle the sound or prevent, I don't know, evidence, I believe.
Okay. Do you have background training experience in determining the timing of death?
Absolutely.
What types of things do you look at to determine the time that somebody died?
Well, the best indication as to when somebody may have died is to develop a window. Well, first off, the science behind it is called forensic taphonomy, T-A-P-H-O-N-O-M-Y, taphonomy. It's actually a branch of science that determines how long it's been that someone has actually died. What we look for are very primitive findings. There are three main ones. It's algor mortis, liver mortis, and rigor mortis. It is the stiffening of the human body, the cooling of the human body, and then the settling of blood. Those are kind of the three main things that we're looking for. The best indication is when was a person last seen, when were they found. Obviously, somewhere in that window is when somebody was killed or otherwise died.
So in this case, which factors did you look at?
Well, all three.
Okay. Let's speak first about, I think, algor mortis. That's the temperature?
Correct.
Did you use that in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And how so?
Well, our investigator and our doctor, well, the body was refrigerated at the time of autopsy, but our investigator noticed that the body was cold at the time that he responded to the scene. Given that scenario, the body reaching room temperature tells us that it took a number of hours for that temperature to drop to the temperature that it was.
Okay. And there's obviously many variables involved in that, such as the temperature inside the room and other factors. Is that
Absolutely.
Right? Estimating time of death, is this an exact science?
It is an inexact science. Unfortunately, it's very primitive. It still maintains that it's very primitive at this point. I wish we could offer something better, but we can't.
Okay. Well, you do the best you can.
We do the best we can.
Okay. Next, let's talk about liver mortis. What is liver mortis?
Liver mortis, again, is the settling of blood to the dependent portions of a body. So if a body is lying on the back, then that blood will settle to the back. There are areas of relative sparing where the body is resting its body weight on. So, for example, there will be sparing on the buttocks and the shoulder blades, usually when somebody's on their back.
Let me just stop you there, because I'm getting a little confused.
Surely.
You use the word sparing. What does that mean?
The blood can't settle there because it's compressed, because it's maintaining the body weight itself.
Okay.
The blood can't get into there, if you will.
Let's take a step back. I'm standing here, I'm alive, I'm breathing, and if I'm standing here for a period of time, am I going to get this type of liver mortis, settling of blood?
No, because you have a heart that is constantly circulating your blood through our circulatory system. Okay. When we die, that's no longer the case. The red blood cells will settle by gravity to the dependent portions of the body.
Okay. And to settle by gravity, I take it then that the red blood cells have to move through all the tissues of the body till something physically stops them from moving anymore.
Actually, what happens is that the vessels that contain them start to degrade and break down, and then they seep out into the soft tissues.
Okay. And then do they then have to move through the soft tissues to the exterior portions?
It kind of not so much move, but just end up there, if you will.
Okay. And during this settling process of the blood, while the blood settles, if there's a pressure point on the skin that's compressing the body at that point, are you saying that the blood doesn't settle into that portion that's being pressed?
Exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. So parts of the body that there was pressure applied to, you would expect not to see blood in that area, right?
Correct.
And parts of the body where there was not pressure applied to, you would expect to see the appearance of blood settling in that area.
Correct.
Okay. I have a photograph. May I mark this as People's 37G? It's already marked. I'm going to show you 37G.
Meanwhile, we have a person in the audience. You need to pull your mask up over your nose, please. Thank you. Go ahead. You may proceed.
Thank you. We got a little flickering. Stop. We have one backup plan if this keeps going.
Thank you.
Keep our eye on it. Okay, so you see 37G here?
I do.
Do you see the effects of this liver mortis you were describing?
Yes, I do.
Describe for the jury what you mean, and you can turn around and point to the photograph if you need to.
So again, liver mortis refers to that settling of blood. She was found on her back. This is consistent with her body position at the time that she was found. The blood is settled to the back of the body. You can see reddish discoloration. Point here, here.
It's okay, it happens all the time.
But of course, here, this area here, the back of the thighs. But again, we have sparing on the buttocks area and the shoulder blades. That's weight bearing. That's holding her body at the time that she died. Thank you.
So, look at this photograph. On her buttocks, it's white. And is that because her butt, when she was laid on her back, was pressed against the ground?
Correct.
And the small of her back looks like it's red. Is that because when someone naturally lays down, their low back has a slight arch, so there's no contact with the floor?
Correct.
And then you'd see above that in her middle back towards her shoulder area, it's pressed again because that's the part of your body that's pressed against the ground?
Correct.
Okay. I guess it would be the same thing with her calves were pressed against the ground?
Exactly.
And how does this tell you about time of death?
So it takes a couple of hours to start developing, but it's not the word that we use is fixed. In other words, if somebody has passed away and in the first couple of hours they're moved, that blood will continue to settle in the new position for the first couple hours. But after that, it becomes fixed. And what does that mean? Those blood cells have actually escaped and they're not going anywhere. So sometimes that can tell us if somebody has been moved after they've died. It starts to, again, develop after a couple hours and it's fully fixed. I use quotations because it's a very broad-shaped range, again, very primitive, but usually it fully fixed at about 12 hours. So after 12 hours, the blood is going to settle, and it's going to settle and not move at that point.
Finally, we talked about rigor mortis. Can you describe what role that plays in determining time of death?
So rigor mortis, along with, again, the other two that we've previously discussed, rigor mortis is a primitive tool that we use. It is the postmortem rigidity that occurs after somebody has died. What does that mean? So the muscles will actually lock up in the position that the body is found. So if our decedent was found like this, her muscles would actually end up locked like that. And if you were to find her when the rigor mortis was actually present, you could lift her up and her arms would maintain in that locked position. So it would start to develop at about 2 to 4 hours, just like liver mortis, and it also becomes fully developed, if you will, at about 12 hours. Then it starts to disappear. Why? Because we start to decompose. The process of decomposition will start to come into play. And that big bell-shaped curve is anywhere between 18 and 36 hours. So again, very, very rough, primitive estimates. I know in Hollywood they tell you, oh, she died 2 hours ago. It's impossible for action to be very accurate with that unless we have videotape documentation.
So when you say decomposition starts to, I guess, reverse the process of rigor mortis, Just in very crude layman's terms, what is decomposition?
Our body starts to rot, for lack of a better term, right? And so even our muscles will start to rot, and that rigor mortis, that locking of those muscle fibers, will start to fall apart.
All right. And eventually, the muscles rot to the degree where all that rigidity is gone, and now you're flexible again.
Correct.
And the process to become completely flexible again, once from the point in time you die to when you're completely flexible again, is 18 to 36 hours?
Correct.
Okay, so then I take it if you're completely flexible, you've been dead at least 18 to 36 hours.
Somewhere in that bell-shaped curve, that's correct.
But you could have been dead even longer.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you see any signs, first of all, in looking at the investigative notes, as well as notes on autopsy, what was the state of rigor mortis?
So rigor mortis had passed at the time that our investigator recorded it in his documentation, and that the time that the autopsy pathologist, Dr. Seltzer, actually made her documentations.
And were you able to see with your own eyes by looking at the reports and notes, photographs, et cetera, other signs to you that rigor mortis had passed?
Again, from Dr. Seltzer's autopsy photos, I was able to make that determination, correct.
Okay, and what types of things did you see?
Again, the early stages of decomposition of the soft tissues of the chest and abdomen display early decomposition.
And there was softening of that chest and abdomen?
Correct.
What are autolytes?
So as we start to rot, again, lack of a better term, our body's decomposition process produces fluids, and we call them products of decomposition for, again, lack of a better term, and they accumulate in the lungs, in the spaces of our chest, in our abdomen, can actually come out the mouth. We call that purge. Again, horrible word, but those are signs that somebody is starting to decompose.
Okay, and was that present? Did you find those autolytes?
According to Dr. Seltzer's report, they were present.
Okay. So in your opinion, based on your background, training experience, and everything that you personally observed in this case, was the condition of the body consistent with the victim being shot between 10 p.m. on December 22nd and 9 a.m. on December 23rd of the year 2000?
Yes.
Any doubt about that?
No, not at all.
Sometime in that range?
Again, the whole day before, if you will, absolutely, somewhere in there.
Okay. Could have been shot sometime in the evening of the 22nd, could have been shot early morning on the 23rd. You can't really tell from a forensic pathologist's point of view.
Correct.
But it's consistent somewhere in that range.
Correct.
Just really quickly, I should have shown you this photo. I've marked it, so I'll show it to you. I expect then, looking at 37G, if you were to see a photo of the front of her body, you would expect, if she was laid on her back, not to see any redness on the front. Is that right?
It's very different redness, but that, yes, for lack of a better term, there is no settling of the blood to the front parts of the chest.
Okay. If you could please look at 37H and then 37I. 37H, is the appearance of the skin consistent with her being laid out on her back for that period of time you described?
Yes.
Same question with respect to 37I.
Yes.
When somebody is shot, stabbed, attacked with some sort of a deadly weapon, in your experience as a forensic pathologist, if they're aware of what's about to happen to them, what type of injuries would you be able to observe?
So oftentimes we will see what are called defensive injuries. Again, very common sense. Our natural response is to defend ourselves best we can, even in the face of projectiles coming at us or sharp implements. And so what do we naturally do? We kind of ball up. Again, common sense. We ball up, put our hands up. So injuries can sometimes be sustained to the backs of the hands, the backs of the forearms, or the palms as we're trying to ward off our attacker.
And can this be common when someone is going to be shot, in particular in the head, do they often try to protect their head?
They can, absolutely.
In gunshot wound cases where someone is shot in the head and they're aware of what's happening, do you see injuries to the arms, the forearms, the hands?
Absolutely. Again, we put our hands up trying to stop the bullet, when in reality it's just going to pass on through, but there'll be injuries to the hands themselves, you bet.
Did you see any evidence in your background training experience in this case to suggest to you that Susan Berman knew that she was going to be shot?
Not during the autopsy and not the evidence that we have available.
Okay. Assume that she was walking straight forward, looking ahead, with someone behind her whom she was trusted, and then was shot in the back of the head and didn't know what was coming. Would that hypothetical be consistent with all the evidence you've seen in this case based on your background training experience?
Yes, absolutely.
I'd like to show you a photograph. Did you review, before I do that, did you review the autopsy report as well as all the photographs for the death for decedent Morris Black, a victim in Galveston, Texas?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and did you at some point meet with the coroner from Galveston, Texas, who had testified at a jury trial in that particular case?
I didn't meet him individually.
Okay.
I think we had a discussion with him.
Like on a telephone?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm going to show you some photographs from that autopsy, and I'm going to ask you some questions, okay?
Certainly.
I have a photograph. May I mark this as People's, I think we're on 38, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you People's 38. Okay. Is this one of the photographs you've previously seen from the autopsy of Morris Black?
Yes.
All right, and is this a photograph of Morris Black's right hand?
Yes, it is.
Do you see the injury to the, I don't know, I guess is that an index finger?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Are you able to, as a forensic pathologist, look at injuries and determine whether they were caused while a person was alive versus after they were already dead?
Yes. In most instances, we can.
Okay. And what is an injury called that occurs before someone dies?
It's called an ante-mortem injury versus a post-mortem injury after they die.
Okay. How do you determine whether an injury is ante-mortem or post-mortem?
They look very different. So an ante-mortem injury, as you can imagine, there's no blood pressure, there's no beating heart, so there's no blood flowing to that particular area. And it doesn't look bloody at all. It looks, in fact, it can look very yellow and dried out. We call it parchment-like, almost like paper, very dried out, desiccated are the words that we use, versus a injury that occurs when there is blood pressure. We call that a vital reaction. There's actually blood seeping into the soft tissues. It looks bloody when we examine the wound itself. Very, very different.
Well, when someone dies, are you saying that you actually need blood pressure to force blood through the various pathways to exit a wound?
Yes, that's what happens, correct.
And without that pressure of a beating heart, the blood doesn't make it through the different pathways to exit a body?
Correct.
What are the different pathways that blood has to go through?
The capillaries on the superficial layers of the skin and body, and then the deeper vessels are bigger in size, feeding the organs and what have you.
Based on examination of People's 38, do you have any opinions as to whether this wound occurred before Morris Black died or after Morris Black died?
I do have an opinion.
What is that opinion?
These appear to be post-mortem. And again, why? Because there's no hemorrhage at all that I can see. It looks a little dried out and desiccated, but it looks like these are post-mortem wounds that I would normally see.
Well, assume that this body part was immersed in water for some period of time. Would that affect your opinion, or would you still have the same opinion?
It would affect my opinion because it does make it a little bit harder that water can actually leach out any blood or vital reaction that might be present, but it does not affect my opinion. In this particular case, it looks very post-mortem to me.
So even though it was immersed in water, if that hypothetical is true, and some of the blood had leached out, would you still expect to find, in your background training experience, some evidence of prior bleeding in this area?
Yes,
Okay. And do you see any evidence whatsoever?
I do not.
So, in your opinion, this is a post-mortem injury?
Correct.
In your opinion, what type of instrument caused this injury?
Many different instruments can cause this injury. Looks like a very ragged, irregular, sharp force injury. I mean, just again, common sense like what we see. This is not a clean, sharp, single slice. This is kind of ragged and irregular.
I'm going to show you, Your Honor, may I mark another photograph, People's 38?
39?
I'm sorry, 39?
Yeah.
I'm going to mark the first one 39A, and the second one People's 39B.
How many photos?
Just
in
two.
39?
Just two.
2 photos, A and B.
Oh, 38.
Your Honor, you have a juror with her hand up.
We have a juror with the screens
flickering?
out.
Okay. You want to just turn it off? We just turn it off and turn it sideways so they can.
Yes, you may.
We'll take care. Try to another fix at the break. We've tried many ends. We had the court staff come and see what they could try to fix it.
Now it'll work.
Should we just turn it off so it doesn't flash?
Working
Yeah,
just fine
okay.
now.
Can
All
everybody?
right. Well,
She can't see.
yeah, we may need to disconnect it and move it into the hallway. Or slide it down. If it goes down all the way, lower it.
It has all the makings of a disaster.
How many DAs does it take to move a television?
I'm trying to slow down as best I can.
Is it time for a break for Rona? You want a break now? You need me to tell him? Yeah, okay. Slow down.
I've heard.
I thought she told you.
I heard her.
Oh, Bailey, okay. Do you need a break now while they're doing this, or you? What? They got it? Okay.
I think sure David Diggering out on the other end here. Got an alibi.
No, they gotta tip it. No, you gotta tip it. We'll figure it out.
Right now, there's nothing being said.
Gotta let them back in.
I was just to say, quick, lock the door.
The door's locked.
Oh no. Oh, well, oh! That was a TV.
You do want to take the break?
Mr. Bailey has been knocked in the head. I don't know if this will improve.
Want the break now?
Decreases.
Hopefully, it won't affect my performance. Yeah, I'm fine.
Mr. Bailey, and I'm going to give you a moment to get to recover from this. We're going to take a 15-minute break, so we'll come back at 10:40. Remember, do not talk about the case or about any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not make up your mind about the verdict or any issue until you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. No tweeting, Facebook, or social media. See you at 10:40.
No, I'm good.
No, dude, hold on.